I will buy things or go be a part of things and not let money be the excuse. I will intentionally spend money on things without knowing that money is like an energy and that the outer world is a reflection of our inner world, and that, like attracts like, law of attraction, all this type of stuff. And that what we put our attention to is where it flows, all that type of stuff, right? I believe in all of that. Sometimes I will like intentionally buy something that I know I can't afford, and I won't buy it just for the sake of buying it. Like recently I got into guitar. I spent about $800 on a guitar and an amp, not that much, but for something that like I'm just messing around with and brings me a little bit of fun. And I played all the time for the first 3 weeks. And now 2 months later, I barely ever play anymore. You could be like, oh, well, that wasn't like the most conscious purchase. Or another example, I just spent $3,000 on a couch, and my budget for a couch was like $500 to $700. And then I was like, all right, well, $3,000, like, that seems stupid to spend that on a couch, but I'm going to show that it's kind of like a gesture of like, I'm not holding on to this fear state, and I release I'm blanking for words, to be honest here, but I think the listeners and kind of what I'm saying. It's like when you view it more as an energy, and you don't hold on to it with that clingy energy, and you're not using an excuse not to do something. Deciding if I'm going to go to an event in later May that is going to be more than I can afford right now. It's very expensive, but it's soul development, and it's going to help me so much. And anytime I invest in myself, it always comes back tenfold. I'm a huge fan of communicating with my guides. There's a book called Ask Your Guides by Sonia Choquette, and she explains all the different types of guides and how to communicate with them. And just last week, I rarely ever do this, but instead of like, putting down an intention or goal, or, working with a dream box or a manifestation type thing, I straight asked my guides for a specific sale from a specific client, and it came exactly what I want. And a lot of times we have these miracles, these synchronicities that occur, these signs, and we're like, well, that's not enough. So I have a new prayer to them that's going a little bit deeper in terms of a sale for money. And it also talks about how I'm going to use this money and what it's for and everything. And that it's also part of me really believing in the magic, if you can make this work. So we'll see how that goes.
Find it interesting too, because a string of thought that I heard in there that I've been trying to view is like the idea of, I don't want to say spending money just to spend it, but spending it with the intention that you realize the abundance of it. So therefore you're not going to hold on to it. And it's interesting to me because I see it in the lens of almost attachment, in a sense, where, for example, there was a statue that I saw in Egypt, and I was looking for a red granite, Anubis sitting down in a seated position, which was like the position that kings were displayed kind of on the entrances to their tombs. So I was like, damn, if we can find an Anubis in red granite sitting like this, I'm down, I'll buy it. And what happened is they were looking, I was looking all over Egypt for this, and it doesn't exist. I can't find it anywhere. But what they ended up finding was this incredible statue. It was probably 2 feet tall, but absolutely beautiful. It had like gold inlet around the eyes. It had kind of like a ruby outlet. They had hieroglyphs kind of carved into the side of it. And even one of the hieroglyphs talked about how, like, it was talking about how Anubis was giving his power to Ramses II, and the king Ramses II was like, for some reason, he was calling to me that entire trip as well. And he comes down to the price of it. He's like, I don't know why the guy got this statue. The price is insane, blah, blah, blah. I was like, all right, well, tell me what the price is. He's like, $40,000. I kind of laughed. I was like, dude, I can't, can't fucking afford that. First of all, they think everyone from America is rich, like rich, like fucking Bezos status for some reason.
40 grand, get out of here.
Right. And well, haggling is a huge part of that like culture. So, you know,
Mm-hmm.
what I kind of found out later is that if I would have said, so let me just tell it in stride. So I'm sitting there looking at it, I'm like this thing's fucking beautiful. Like it's resonating with my soul. I'm like, dude, this thing like has me, right? And I'm sure he saw that too. And I'm kind of looking at it. I'm like, dude, I can't afford this. Like I'm talking to my travel guide, the tour guide, because he speaks obviously Arabic. He knows the people. And I'm like, man, like the most I could probably do is like 800, maybe 900, right? Dollars. And I'm like, I don't even want to tell him that because that'd be rude. And so he's like, well, just tell him and see what happens. So I tell him 800 and he kind of scoffs it off, walks away. And then he says something to the tour guide in Arabic and walks past. And the tour guide said, like, you know, if you had 10K or like 11K, I could get it for you for that price. And the thing is I would have.
What does that mean?
$10,000.
If you had a $10,000, he could get it for you for $1,000.
No. He could get you for 10K or 11K. Oh, did I say that right?
Okay, got it.
If I would have said like or in that $1,000 range, he would have been able to get it for like 10 to 11. And I kind of sat there and like tried to like lower my emotional state and like kind of connect with, you know, higher power, higher soul. And a part of me was telling me kind of what you were saying, where it's like, you know, kind of just spend it as this like almost donation per se to the universe to say, hey, I understand that money's abundant. I'm looking at the statue that's resonating with my soul, you know, and it would be sitting right here in front of me right now, resonating with my soul had I purchased it. But then there was another kind of side of me that came in, and it was the side of, well, you said that if you found him sitting, then you would have bought it. And I was like, you know, so it became this level of like discipline versus listening to maybe my higher self, I would say. And I'm still kind of trying to process it or trying to think about it, because to me, it's like, well, you know, had I bought it, maybe it would have empowered me to do something to make back that 10K or make back that 12K in order to kind of pay for it. Does that kind of make sense of what I'm saying?
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying. And, you know, I'd invite the listeners and yourself too. It's just kind of like, for me, what comes up is it's all relative, because that $10,000 to you might be $500 or $1,000 to me or someone else, right? And for me, like, I think my limit based off the way you're telling the story would be maybe $2,000 tops, you know, probably closer to $1,000. But because when I hear $10,000, this is like kind of what my book's about: soul life balance and the masculine, the feminine archetypal energy and yin and yang and all that type of stuff. And, you know, the masculine here would be the structure and, you know, the actual like writing down paper, pros and cons, whereas the feminine, the soul, is more feeling into it, right? And you can feel into it on a certain level, but that's where spiritual bypassing comes in, where people are like, oh, I'm just feeling into my guides, you know, or I'm feeling, and yes, energetically, it will come back to me, you know, all that, which that's, in my opinion, that's all BS. Like, you need a balance of both. So I like how you went about this with both, you know, you felt into it with your soul, and then also in the masculine, the life side, like, it's like, okay, but does this actually make sense? I don't want to just spiritually bypass. So I don't feel like there's a one size fits all answer, because it's very subjective, and that gets into my business stuff, talking about subjective and objective things. But yeah, I do a similar process to you. So yeah, I feel what you're saying for sure.
And as you were kind of saying that, I completely forgot until you were talking about this, because I think after that occurred, you know, I was in the van and I couldn't get this thing out of my head. Like, I was thinking about, I could still just see it sitting in front of me right now. And, you know, what it actually kind of reminded me of, or made me realize, is that I had been, and I have been, very much in my, let's say, feminine energy, with just go with the flow. You know, I'm just going to be in this creation state. I'm just, you know, I kind of basically went to Egypt on a whim, you know, and it was kind of that enlightenment of like, well, look, you said that, you know, if he was sitting, if he was doing this, then, you know, you would buy it. He's not sitting. And that was kind of like when that masculine kind of took over. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I guess it's really fascinating to kind of see that balance even in work. And it really kind of had this epiphanic moment for me of like, well, you know, we do need to find this balance. We need to come back to this structure that you I exercised for the first 26, 27 years of my life, and maybe this last year I've been a lot more, kind of in that, feminine energy of just like, just feel what you should do next. And, it's one of those yin yangs, like you were saying, and the pendulum's trying to find the middle ground of like, okay, well, you had this extreme masculine energy for 26 years. Now this last year, we're kind of swinging back to feminine. And now I feel like that was a structure of like, okay, now I'm starting to find that balance, that middle ground of, okay, where is the level of balance? Where's the level of masculine? Where's the level of feminine? The idea of like hustle culture, to me, hustle culture seems toxic, to use that word. It seems like a unsustainable, you're not going to enjoy life type of broadcast that is getting sent out there. It's this idea of if you work hard, you'll be rewarded. Like you should be working hard. You should be, only getting 6 hours of sleep. And maybe it's not that, but you should be working, 60 hours a week or 70 hours a week. And it's like, it comes back to your whole soul life balance thing, where to me, life should be almost more of a play. And this was something that my psilocybin shaman kind of talked about all the time, where, things should just be light. Like everything should just be fun. You should just enjoy everything you're doing. It should almost be child-esque in every element of your life. If you're recording a podcast, if you're building a business, if you're, trying to romanticize a woman, like all of it should just be in the spirit of play in a sense.
Yeah, I agree. I think hustle culture is very toxic, and Gary Vee is kind of, in my reality, is at the forefront of that. And there's a lot of things that Gary Vee does that represents as good, and he's doing good in the world. Yeah, at the same time, I feel like he brings a lot of toxicity in, and others as well, and I don't believe in hustle culture. I think that's a huge part of the problem. And similar to you journeying with psilocybin, my first big psilocybin ceremony for healing really showed me how like we don't need to work and we don't need all these industries. And so really, yeah, I used to be very much into hustle culture. I was before, but now like that is repugnant. Never used that word before.
Where I see like a lot of influence. I don't really like the word influencers. Where a lot of coaches,
content creators.
Yeah, everyone's an influencer. First of all.
Oh, I like that.
That's why I try not to use that word, because I feel like it's like, dude, you're taking away from the individual. But regardless, that's a whole nother conversation.
It's the gray area of spiritually bypassing, right?
Well, okay, so let's dive into this. You keep saying spiritually bypassing, and
Are you familiar with that term?
I am not, and you're using it in very interesting spots. So could you break it down for me?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to refer to my book, and I just need to find the section because I have the book right here. And it's funny. I could tell you the story, and the short version, I'd rather read it in the book because I felt like it was.
Is this in Soul Life Balance?
Pretty. Yeah, it's in my book. Yeah. Here it is, page 150. You mind if I just read it?
By all means.
All right, so this is just like a little short section, but spiritually bypassing. Here we are. It's a page 150 out of 300 page book, by the way. You wouldn't know it if I didn't write this out to you, but this section on the topic of spiritually bypassing is actually one of the last pieces I wrote for this book. This book has been nearly 3 years in the making. I've done countless mind maps and outlines as I dreamt up the contents of the book, and I write in a very non-linear fashion. I follow the topics that call to me in the moment, and from time to time, I jump around from section to section, writing, quote unquote, out of order. Of course, I have a thorough outline to guide which sections will go where, but even then, you never completely know what will come through until you take pen to paper, or in my case, fingers to keyboard. I've taken some time to reflect on why I kept avoiding this topic of spiritually bypassing, and what came to me was that in many ways, I was actually spiritually bypassing, writing about spiritually bypassing. I tell myself any number of reasons why I wasn't ready, playing games in my mind and negotiating with myself. I love the concept of spiritually bypassing, and perhaps I twist the meaning in my awareness to apply toward my behavioral patterns just as much as I do with my spiritual beliefs. For example, I use the concept of spiritually bypassing to observe how I will reason with myself as a way of getting out of something or justifying something due to its relation to my beliefs. Spiritually bypassing on a more woo level is when we specifically look at our spiritual beliefs and use them as a reason, excuse, or justification for a way of being and or behaving. Some common examples are when people say things like, everything is perfect and everything is meant to happen exactly as it does. Although I do 100% believe in both of these statements, you may notice within yourself and others when these statements are actually coming from another voice, a voice not of your highest and best good. It's another page and a half or so, but I think right there kind of, it's just a cool story of like how I was spiritually bypassing writing it. But yeah, it's essentially using your belief system and using the more feminine and yin and soul and spiritual side to come up with a reason. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
No, it does. It was ripping me to my core at some points you were reading that. Because it totally makes sense. It's actually a really fascinating topic because, you know, I totally can see how it plays out in exactly what you're saying. It's like I'm almost like foregoing or giving my masculine energy to my feminine, if that makes sense. It's almost like you're taking the construct of money, right? Or discipline and just saying, oh, well, like if my soul wanted me to do it, then I would be doing it kind of thing, as opposed to creating that disciplined structure or trying to appropriately set the digital course. It's
like what we were talking about with your statue where it's like, oh yeah, I don't have 10 grand, but I'll open up a new credit card with 0% interest for 15 months and I don't have to worry about paying it for 15 months and I'll come back with, the money will come back to me, you know, right away. So it's fine, but I have this other thing. So yeah, I'm just going to do it. Like I'm calling it in, I'm manifesting it. Actually, what I just said is way more than spiritual bypassing because I add in the masculine with the credit card, right? Like that's the logic and the analytical side. So that's a bad example. But if you get that $10,000 and be like, oh, I don't have this money, but I'm going to manifest it and it'll come back to me because that's how the universe works. To me, that's spiritual bypassing. But the way you were describing how you went about it earlier was not. It's just like this thin gray area, you know, it's a thin line and it's a gray area. And I think I see so many people get caught in spiritually bypassing that just everything is love and light and everything, you know, and it's just like, that's when I kind of I gag a little, you know, I'm like, okay, well, roll my eyes or whatever.
Well, and that is something that might be an element of like the toxic almost portion of spirituality in a sense where, because I've seen that myself where it's almost, they're too much in their emotions and they're too much like just like we were saying floaty or just too much like air underneath them or too predicated on their emotional state. And it keeps pulling them all over the place, which is like this element of needing to come back to the masculine, to have some sort of structure that you can stand on and have this level of discernment that you're able to explain these emotions in a way and you don't need to act on them. Like I was saying with the statue, like my higher self, the whatever you want to call it, the spiritual part of me, I was still having that balance of masculine energy to be like, dude, no, you're going to put yourself in a financial situation that's going to create a lot of pressure. It might create this, you know, bring you to a place of fear.
It also goes back to what I said earlier about the DUI I had. Like, I do believe that, and I think I said something about this earlier, like, part of me feels like I was supposed to have that DUI and that was supposed to happen. Then, you know, that would be like not having free will, that I always was going to do that. And we could all obviously get into alternate realities and timelines and things like that, where like one decision creates a split off of other decisions in different timelines, which that's another one where it's interesting to talk about. I don't have a firm stance any specific way, but going back to the DUI, like, I think if I choose to have this conversation and take the side of us, if I choose to take the side of having free will, then I chose, right, to drive and get the DUI. then I still think that there would be something else that would have came into my life that would have put me in that situation of eventually getting my shit together. So in a sense, it could be a moot point that whether we have free will or not, it's not so much about like that actual experience of like picking up the pen or not, or, you know, breaking the vase in the movie The Matrix, or, you know, me driving drunk and getting a DUI, whatever, as it is something will happen to be the catalyst for XYZ. And that I do believe in. That I believe in more than getting so granular in the actual specific of how it manifests versus like, oh, this is going to happen to propel you towards this adventure.
I went to the National Museum of History. There's a really nice one here in Pittsburgh, Carnegie, and just to look at all the dinosaur bones that they've got there. What blows my mind is whenever they talk about the years that they believe that certain dinosaurs were on Earth. And it's like somewhere between, if it's a certain species, they have these gaps of like 30 million years, like that they're not sure. Like, it's like maybe they were between 30 million years of existence to me. And then the entire period itself was like 250 million years. And so to me, I'm like, man, I compared humans to it, and humans, I think chimpanzees have been on Earth for maybe 10 million years. And humans, like Homo sapiens, like branched off maybe 5 million years ago. And then our brain developed over the course of 2 or 3 million years. And so to me, it's like, how on earth was there not a conscious being on Earth? Because mushrooms had to be here. Maybe that's maybe that, because I believe in that. I think there's a whole lot of value in the stoned ape theory. I'm sure you're familiar with that. Mm-hmm. So I guess maybe the one thing is maybe that the asteroid that took out the dinosaurs brought mushrooms with it. But assuming that mushrooms were here before mycelium was here before dinosaurs, there had to be a conscious, it's something that was self-aware whenever dinosaurs existed, right? To me, it just, I was looking at all these numbers and I'm like, there's no way that there hasn't, and I know it's going to sound crazy to say, like, there's no scientific evidence for anything that I'm spewing right now, but it was just like this intuitive download that was like there had to have been something. There had to have been something conscious that was alive during the dinosaurs that was self-aware of its surroundings. And like you're saying, if an asteroid hit, there's going to just wipe it out, and we're not going to know that there was ever anything like that.